So welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to talk about hard coding our components. Up until now, everything that we did was in the design mode of Android Studio's layout editor. In this lesson, we're going to learn how do we actually write code to make our user interface elements. And then we're going to see how do we do it even without the XML, and we do it right in the Kotlin file, and we do it at the runtime. So let's get started with that. I'm going to head into Android Studio. I'm going to start a new Android Studio project. Let's call this one hard coding components. And in here, I'm going to head into my activity main. And usually up until this point, we have been in this mode, which is our design mode. But today we're going to actually go to our coding mode. Or if you want, you can actually split the two of them. We don't actually need to see the project view, so we could actually see only these two interfaces. And let's see what we have in here and what are the pieces of code that exist up here. So for any object that you have in your design in here, you actually have some piece of code written for it. Right at the very top, we have our main constraint layout. That is the one that you usually see it in here, the constraint layout at the very top. Now, any object that you add to it, we also get to see some sort of code in there. Let me add an object into it. Let me get the palette in here. Let me get myself a little bit more space. Let's say I have this button, and automatically we end up seeing a lot of code that gets added in here because this is the code that basically creates the button. Now, in the earlier days of Android Studio, this was more or less the way of creating interfaces. Almost everything was by hard coding. One step at a time, the design aspect of it has become a lot stronger. So you can actually do most everything in the design part. You still need to know the XML. You need to know how it actually works in here. If you wanted to code something on our own, it's actually not that difficult. And there are situations where you can only do it using the coding. So it's a good idea to get a sense of how it actually works. So I'm going to show you some of the code that we could write in here. Let's say I don't have this. I'm going to delete my button. And then what I want to do is I want to add a text view. So the moment you want to add anything, you open a triangular bracket and then you write the name of the object that you want. Just like the Kotlin file is going to autocomplete for you. That's going to show you the different options. What I want is a text view. And the moment you add almost any kind of layout, there are two parameters or two tags that you must satisfy. That is the width and that's the height of your object. I'm going to say the width of it is actually match parent, and you can see it on the fly in here on the right side. And I can say the height of it, let's say it is 64 dps. When you are done with any new object, you actually have to close that XML tag. And for closing, you basically put one forward slash and automatically the triangular bracket shows up and it closes it down. So that is basically the simplest type of object that you can make. And that is that object that doesn't have a background color, doesn't know where it is, but it knows what is the size of it in terms of the width and height. The next thing that almost every object needs is an ID, and that's something that we have been doing using the attributes. Now I'm going to say the ID is actually called my text view, and now I've got an ID for my object. The next thing I could do is actually something like a background, and for the background I'm actually going to give it one of the primary colors, say color primary, and automatically we can see it there. The next thing I could do is say a text. And the text on it, you could either set a text through the strings, which is something we haven't discussed yet, or we could just put a static text in here. I'm going to say statically say hello. And I don't know if you can see it up there, but that's a little hello in there. So let's go ahead and fix that. I'm going to say a text size. Basically, I'm going to put a value of it, for instance, like 44 sp. So my text becomes 44 sp. My text becomes a lot larger. Let's say I want to get the text color. So the text color, I'm actually going to go ahead and say text color is actually Android, let's say white. So I want it to be a white text in there. I could set the text alignment. So the text alignment becomes center, for instance. So all of the things that we do with the attributes, they have a code correspondent in here, and that's what we would expect to see. Otherwise it wouldn't actually work. Everything in here must have a piece of tag that is a part of your XML. Now the other thing I could do is we usually set constraints. So let's see how I'm going to set the constraints for this guy. What I want to do is I want to set it again horizontally in the center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say constraint start to a start. So a start to a start, constraint a start to a start of. I'm going to say this is basically parent. So it's going to constrain the start of this to the start of the parent. It's kind of difficult to see right now because the width of it is taking the whole screen. So maybe we set the width of it to be smaller. Maybe the width of it actually becomes wrap content. So as much content as it is in there. So the start of it becomes like that. Then I'm going to go ahead and say constraint end of it to the end. So end constraint end to the end of the parent. So both beginning and the end are constrained, just like how we used to do it before. And then maybe I could go ahead and say constrain the top of it to something as well. So I'm gonna say constrain top, and I'm gonna say constrain the top to the top of parent as well. So it's basically stuck to the top in here as well. Now, what if I wanted to leave a little bit of a gap in the top? So I could actually go in here and say margin, and I want to have a margin top. And maybe the margin top is, I don't know, 100 dps. So it basically does the same thing as we usually do with the constraints. It basically pushes it down to as many dps as we ask it for. I made a little spelling error in here. That is not an actual error, it's more of a really a spelling error. You just have to close it down at the same level. Now I've got this text view set up there properly, and it is right there. We could add other things in here. Maybe I would want to add some padding to it. Maybe I would say padding padding start, let's say 20 dps, and then again the same error I made again, and then padding end, same thing, 20 dps. And that's how I can actually make things entirely programmatically. Now let's see what are the situations that we actually have to do things only entirely using programming. Let's say I don't have this object, and before I do that, something I want to really recommend you guys to do is this. If you're trying to write things programmatically, and if you're trying to learn XML, and this is the beginning of your journey, something that could really help you is cheating. So what you could do is, if you want to make a button, you could actually grab a button in here, put it there in your design, and then do some constraints for it, for instance, like that, and then look at your code to figure out what happened in here and how was it built. This is one of the most powerful parts of Android Studio and Android development in general that at least I haven't seen in any other platform. I haven't seen it in developing games with things such as Unity. I haven't seen it in iOS and Xcode, that you can't see what you're doing with your design in your code. But here, when you design something, you can actually see what it says. It says my layout, width and height are wrap content. The text on it says button. The layout is constrained end to it to the end of a parent, and then it has an absolute y-axis position of 253 dp, and then it has an ID. So you can actually learn a lot from the settings that you set up in here. Now, in any case, I don't want to have any of these guys. I want to delete all of these guys and push them away. And what I want to do is I want to change my main layout. So far, my main layout is basically, let me show you the component tree. It has a constrained layout. And that seems to be something that we never actually touched up until now. But that is not necessarily the case. We could, if we wanted, we could change that. Let me show you the whole code for it. In here, we have a XML version, and then we have an Android constrained layout. And that is basically how the very beginning component in our component tree becomes a constrained layout. But that's not to say that you always want that. There are situations that you actually want to use a linear layout. In fact, constraint layout is one of the newer components in Android Studio. Up until a few versions ago, maybe about 2 years ago, there wasn't something called a constraint layout. It was all based on linear layouts and frame layouts and layouts of such. So if you want, we could actually switch this entire thing. I could actually grab this whole thing, delete that, and say linear layout. And Android Studio is wise enough to know that when you are opening a new tag in XML, it has to close it similarly as well. So I'm going to say linear layout, and now we have a linear layout in here that is going to be our layout. And the one thing that is different between a linear layout and a constraint layout is that the linear layouts, they need to have an orientation. That is the thing that let me go back for a second so I can show you. That's the thing that we set in here. We went and we added a linear layout, and then if you can see it, built into it, there is an orientation. So that's something that I want to build myself. I actually want to come in here, say this is a linear layout, and then somewhere in here there is an orientation which is vertical in this case. And I should have, for some reason it didn't autocomplete the bottom, doesn't matter. So linear layout. So now I have the orientation vertical, and now my entire view, the main view, is basically a linear layout view, which could be the case for a lot of situations. So keep that in mind, that you can modify your objects in here. Another thing, and this is going to be the last one for this lesson, is this. When you open a tag such as a linear layout, you can actually close it down like this. You can go at the very end, whenever you are done with everything that you are writing, put a forward slash and a closing triangular bracket, and that basically closes that tag entirely. Now, this is useful when you want to have a singular object, but if you want that object to have children, you actually have to close it like this, and then go open another one and close it like a forward slash and linear layout. And now it allows me to have children inside it. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say in here, I actually have a view, an object that we saw earlier on. And let's say this is a match parent, and that's a wrap content, and then I close it in here. Now, my view cannot have any children simply because it is closing tags. Its closing tags are like this. But if I want to close it in a way that I can have children for it, I can remove that forward slash, come in here and say view ends in here, and then inside the view I could actually have, for instance, a text view, and my text view would have exactly the same things as before. Let's say width, that's going to be match parent, for instance. Let's say like that. Let me see what's the error in here. No symbol for that. What is going on in here? It's basically right. Perfect. Copy all of that basically. Okay, and that's about that. So if you want to have children inside your code when you're writing your components using XML, you actually have to get rid of that little forward slash and close them down with an actual tag with the complete name of the tag. Otherwise, when you close them with a forward slash, it means that object is solo and doesn't have a child inside it. Of course, when you're doing the design in here, when you're using the drag and drop for designing your UI, Android Studio does all of these things automatically. So if I delete my view in here and I go ahead and let's say I create a linear layout and I drop it in here, it automatically understands that this kind of object is probably expecting children. That's why it is actually leaving this closing tag in here. And the moment I go in there and I drag, for instance, a button into it, it will adjust itself to allocate enough space for the code for the button. So that's why I really suggest that if you want to get better at writing these XML, always look at the code in here. It's kind of a cheat, but you learn a lot of stuff from it, and you will know exactly what you should do. And then there are situations that you cannot do things in the editor, in the attributes editor. Then you might end up coming in here, or a lot of times when you go online and you find sample codes from other developers, they don't it's a lot easier to just give you the code, because if I have this code and I just copy this and I paste it, it becomes this layout. Now compare that with actually having to go and manually making these little pieces piece by piece. So it's a lot easier to be able to copy and paste content from XML as opposed to creating them manually. So you kind of need to know how to use this one. But like I said again, earlier stages, you can just cheat and you can look at the stuff that you have in here and get a sense of how they were created over there. So that's pretty much about it. This is how we actually create outlets and components in XML using coding. I would really encourage you guys to spend some time and get a better sense of how it works. And I'll see you in the next lesson.